Okay, well, thank you so much. Welcome everyone to this Meet the NASA Scientists session. I'm so excited to be here with you today, and this is a great culmination of the Globe Snow View intensive observation period that's been happening throughout the month of February, and just a great end to the week. So we are this is a conversation between some students in Alaska at Delta Junction Junior high school who have been doing some snow research, and Dr. Carrie Vuyovich, the NASA SnowX lead scientist, and Julia White, a NASA SnowX intern. And my esteemed colleague, Christy Buffington at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, is going to introduce these amazing groups in just a moment. So I'm going to keep things going. So just a few notes about the code of conduct before we get started. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted and camera off unless you are a presenter or student group. So we've got several student groups in the room today that we will introduce in just a moment. And students will have the opportunity to unmute and ask questions, and they will have their cameras on. And we ask that you are kind and respectful of others. And we also encourage other participants to ask questions and share your comments in the chat if you're not one of the student groups engaging with our scientists in this conversation. We'd also like to give thanks to Bonnie Murray in the NASA Langley Office of STEM Engagement for developing the framework for the Meet the NASA Scientist sessions that inspired today's session. This is a collaboration. The Meet the Scientist sessions that Bonnie led is a collaboration between the Arctic and Earth Science project, and you can take a look at all of the great Meet the Scientist archive and sessions on the Arctic and Earth Science page. So we'll put that in the chat. And I also want to encourage our students who are in the room. You are welcome to take notes. We have a great Meet the Scientist note-taking guide that you can also see is linked to this Meet the Scientist page here. This was developed by Joy Hamilton, who I'm not sure if Joy's in the room quite yet, but we do want to give credit to our amazing educators who develop these great resources for our classrooms to use. All right, so I do want to welcome our participants from all around the world. We've got people joining us from all over the United States. And in addition to our US participants, we've got some people joining us from Guatemala, Poland, Portugal, and the Ukraine. And just for a quick view here, you can see our as of this morning, those who registered in the US, and then if we go over here, we've got our friends in Poland and the Ukraine, and also here are our friends in Guatemala, so shout out to them. And then we've got all of these amazing groups here in Alaska. So I would love to give a shout out to all of these people, particularly our student groups. And so as I call you out, if you have your camera on, I would love for you to give a wave to the camera. So I'm going to stop my sharing for a moment so we can see you. So we've got some friends in Eagle, Alaska with Christy Jones Robbins. Eagle, can you give us a wave? Yay, thank you. And is Joy, let's see, is Joy Hamilton here? Looks like maybe not yet. Okay, well, we might have some students from Shagaluk. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, joining us. And how about Fairbanks? We might have some friends from Fairbanks joining us in this call, but it looks like they're not here yet. And then we've got our group of student scientists from Delta Junction. Delta Junction, can you give us a wave? And we're going to be hearing more from our student scientists in Delta Junction very shortly. So welcome to all the students and all of the student scientists, I should say. We've got some NASA scientists, some student scientists, and it's great to have you all in this room together today. And so I am going to turn it over to Christy Buffington at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who is also the co-lead for our Globe Snow View IOP, and she's going to introduce our presenters.
Thank you so much, Allison. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today. I am Christy Buffington. I work at the University of Alaska Fairbanks Trothyeta campus, and that is on the lands of the Lower Tanana Dene people in Alaska. I work at the Geophysical Institute in the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And I really want to thank our three main people sharing their snow science stories today. And that is Tammy Kovalenko and her students at Delta Junction Junior High School. On the left, you can see Tammy, and you can see the students collecting on the left, bottom left, you see them using a tube. They're using that tube to get the snow water equivalent of the snow. And on the right, they're measuring the snow depth. And in the middle is Julia White. Julia is a NASA SnowX intern and UAF, or University of Alaska Fairbanks graduate student. And here you see Julia at Delta Junction. She visited Delta Junction back in November, and with that same tube to collect snow. Here it is, the globe rain gauge. And those are students probably in your class in Delta Junction. A big thank you to the person, some people behind the scenes is Tori Brannon, who shared pictures and also put some links in the chat. Wanted to say thanks to Tori. And then also we have Dr. Carrie Vuyovich, who is the NASA SnowX lead scientist. And you can see a picture of Carrie. She's got this orange coat on and some snow pants, and she's on the right of the picture. That's in Fairbanks, Alaska at Kramer's Field. And this was when SnowX scientists and also students came out to learn about snow research. So all three of these scientist groups are all doing snow research in Alaska, in Delta Junction and in Fairbanks and across the whole state. So I'm just really grateful that we can all come together to share our snow science today. And I want to specifically introduce Julia White, who will be speaking next. Julia works at NASA as an intern. She also works at the Alaska Satellite Facility in Fairbanks. I'm super happy that Julia chose to go to college here at the Trothyeta campus of University of Alaska Fairbanks, which I'll just say UAF from here on out, where Julia got a degree in Arctic and Northern Studies. Julia loves school and wants to pursue another more advanced degree in Earth Systems Science here at UAF. And if you are all working on your Globe International Virtual Science Symposium poster, you can choose the Earth System Science Globe badge. So if you wanted to ask Julia about that, you can later. I'll turn it over to you, Julia. Tell us about what you've been doing in snowdrifts here in Alaska and in Delta Junction.
Great, thank you so much, Christy. I am sharing my screen and I'm hoping that it's working. Are you able to see this? Okay, great. So thanks again, Christy, for that introduction. And Christy mentioned that we are in Fairbanks, which is on the native lands of the Dene people of the Lower Tanana River. And we have also been collecting data in Delta Junction and the Eastern Alaska Range, which is on Otna native lands. So I wandered up to Alaska about 5 years ago, thinking that I was just going to spend a summer climbing mountains in the Alaska Range, and I completely fell in love and did not want to leave. So I decided to finish my undergraduate degree at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I was also really interested in science because of how much time I have spent outdoors, and I really wanted to learn more about these places where I spent so much time and that I really loved, but I didn't have a scientific background. And so I was a little worried and unsure about how to, kind of start to become a scientist. And so I decided to apply to some labs doing field work, and I started working in permafrost labs and spruce beetle labs. And through those labs, I started to learn about GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, and remote sensing, and completely fell in love. And here I am 5 years later studying snow and remote sensing, and could not be more excited about it. So, as Christy mentioned, we came out and visited you guys in Delta Junction in November, which was about 3.5 months ago. And when we came out there, we talked to you guys about snow and snowdrifts, and we went over some globe protocols for studying and collecting snow depth measurements and SWE, or snow water equivalent. And I have really been looking forward to this meeting, and I'm really excited to tag up with you guys and see how your data collection and your research has been going. So in all of this, my research goals are to investigate snowdrifts and SWE distribution from the ground, and to investigate snowdrifts and SWE from spaceborne instruments. And these two goals really go hand in hand because, we'll have these satellites way out in space that are collecting data about the Earth, and we can have tons of different methods for, interpreting this data, but we don't know how accurate these measurements are without having some sort of measurements that were taken on the ground. And that's what we call ground truth validation. So we're excited to talk to you guys about your data and to see how we might be able to collaborate with you, and maybe even use some of your data to look at our radar data to see how well our satellites are collecting and how well our algorithms are working. And so another way that we have been collecting data from the ground is through this Globe Snow View Intensive Observation Period, or IOP. And we had this huge IOP for the entire Northern Hemisphere that Christy was the lead scientist on. And in this graphic on the right, you can see data that was collected all over the world. And this is just in February. So there were tons of submissions that people collected of snow, or maybe places where there wasn't any snow, where there may have been snow in the past. And we also had another IOP in Delta Junction. And if you look on the left side, you can see some Alaska submissions. And in the bottom, you can see some submissions from the, Delta Junction IOP that I actually submitted a bunch of these photos on a trip that I took a couple of weeks ago. You can see my yellow skis in the picture there right behind me there. And I went out to go look at a glacier, and I took tons of globe observations along the way. And this is a really great app, and these photos can be really useful for, seeing what the ground actually looks like versus what our satellites in space are telling us about this ground. And so I'm really lucky to get to work with so many great people, including you guys in Delta Junction, and my SnowX and Globe mentors, who are Christy Buffington, who we just met earlier, and Dr. Alicia Joseph, who is an Earth and remote sensing scientist at NASA at Goddard Space Flight Center. She received her PhD in 2010 at University of Maryland, College Park, and studies microwave remote sensing of soil moisture, hydrology, and hydrological modeling. And presenting today, Dr. Carrie Vuyovich, who is the lead scientist of SnowX. And Dr. Carrie Vuyovich is a research physical scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in the Hydrological Science Laboratory. She received her PhD in civil engineering from the University of New Hampshire in 2016 and has 25 years experience studying cold regions hydrology. Her research focuses on using remote sensing, modeling, and ground observations to understand snow and river ice processes. And I will stop sharing and hand it over to Dr. Vuyovich.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. Let me get this up. All right. Does that look okay? Presentation mode? Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here, and I am super excited to see what you all have been working on and share a bit of what I'm working on. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about myself, I'll tell you a little bit about kind of my path and how I got here. I want to talk a little bit about why NASA cares about snow. And then specifically, I'm going to share about the SnowX campaign and some of the work we did up in Alaska a couple of years ago, including right in Delta Junction. So first, a little bit about myself. I grew up in New Hampshire. I love the snow. I love being outside, and apparently I've loved snowmobiling for quite a long time. I went to school for civil engineering and focused on water resources. So I've always been very interested in how much water is available and where does it go and where do we get it. I started working at the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Lab in New Hampshire, but there's also an office in Fairbanks, Alaska. So I've been up there a few times to visit. And then when I went back to school, I also studied civil engineering, but this time I was really focused on using satellite data and trying to understand how much snow was in the mountains and how much was going to be available for water. So specifically, my job is to conduct research to understand the role of snow in the water cycle and try to estimate how much is available for water supply and runoff. So why does NASA care about snow? First of all, it helps cool our planet. Snow covers over a third of the Earth's land surface every year. And that white surface reflects the solar energy right back. So it keeps it cool over all of that land surface. It also acts as an insulating blanket, and that helps lock in some gases, especially in permafrost areas like methane and stuff like that. Snow is an important source of water. About 2 billion people on our planet rely on water from snowmelt for their water supply. And you can think about it, you may be familiar with dams, which are man-made structures that help hold water. And then people use it for water supply, for generating electricity, for industrial use. But snow is like a natural reservoir. It just hangs out there for months and then melts at a certain time of year. And then we can use it for these things. I mean, there are also a lot of animals and plants that rely on snowmelt as well. It's very important for agriculture. We know that snow is strongly linked with soil and vegetation dynamics, and a huge portion of the world's grains are grown in snow-dominated regions. And it can lead to disasters. So this is an example in the Missouri Basin in 2019. There was a heavy rain on top of a large snowpack and caused widespread flooding. And the real impact of this is because of all this water in the fields, the farmers couldn't plant their crops. And it caused millions of dollars in farming losses because they couldn't get their crops in on time. But snow can also cause avalanches. It can help lead to droughts, wildfires, structural failures. If you have heavy snow on top of a building, sometimes the roof falls in, so you have to plan for that, and transportation risk. So for all of these reasons, measuring snow is super important. And NASA uses a bunch of different methods to try to understand how much snow is out there, especially because it's so widespread and it's in so many very remote areas. Satellites are the best way to measure snow over the whole planet. So we collect a lot of ground observations, and Julia already explained this whole process really well. And we use those to compare to satellite data, measurements from airplanes, and also models where we try to use physics to estimate how much snow is going to be out there and when it's going to melt. So some specific activities, NASA sponsored the SnowX campaign, which is a large-scale field and airborne activity where we send lots of people in the field to measure, and then we fly planes with different instruments, and we try to understand what the instruments are measuring. And 2 years ago, we conducted a big campaign in Alaska because there are very unique challenges in the boreal forest and tundra areas that impact our abilities. So we had 4 sites in the Fairbanks area, including the one near Delta Junction, where our boreal forest measurements were collected, and then 2 sites on the North Slope in the tundra region. And then we used all these to compare to what the airborne measurements were collecting. I'm going to talk a little bit about Delta Junction since we have a group in that area. We had a very specific goal in Delta Junction. So specifically, we were trying to understand how the snow albedo changes in space and time. So albedo is that a measurement, the ratio of how much sun comes in and then gets reflected back into space. But it really changes across the landscape based on what's there. So we're really interested in how well we can measure it, and then particularly focused on how, like during the melt period, how it changes, and in locations that are impacted by wildfires. So we measured using this reflectometer on the ground, and then we compared that to an instrument on this aircraft that measures the same thing. And we looked at different locations, unburned, and burned areas to compare. In addition to those reflectance measurements, we're also collecting a whole lot of information about the snowpack to try to understand the properties. And we do that, kind of our core measurement is this snow pit. So during March and April in 2023, we collected data at over 200 snow pits in our 6 sites across Alaska. And we pick a location, and then we take profiles of information all the way down the snow pit wall. So snow depth, snow density, we can use those 2 to calculate SWE, and then temperature, stratigraphy, which is kind of the layering, permittivity, which is how wet the snow is, and then a lot of information about the area around it, weather conditions, vegetation, substrate, which is the ground conditions. We take a GPS point and then a lot of photos. Photos are super important. And this is an example of one of our snow pit locations. And then here are the photos taken standing in the pit. We take a picture looking north and east and south and west, and then straight up and straight down. And this helps us understand what's going on in the area. What are the conditions that might impact the snow that we're measuring right here? What are the conditions that day, which may impact how accurate our measurements are? And then all of these conditions may impact what the satellite or the airplane is seeing that's down on the ground. So I understand a lot of you are collecting these globe measurements, and you'll see that a lot of the measurements are very similar. You're collecting snow depth. You can collect information about the weather and the vegetation, and the protocol for the photos is exactly the same too. So that's super useful information that we can use to compare to our satellite observations and our models. That's all I've got. I'm happy to answer questions, but I would also love to hear about what you all are working on. And I think you have something to share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Carrie Vuyovich. I love that you collected all these snow pits across Alaska. And if you wanted to see how deep the snow is, when the NASA SnowX scientists were out digging snow pits, those are all globe data now too. So you can actually find all those snow pits on the globe website database, which is so cool. You can compare your snow depth data directly with the NASA's snow depth data. So now we really want to hear from the student scientists. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and have them present what they're looking into, which is a big, huge snowdrift at right there next to the school. And I also want to share that their teacher, Tammy Kovalenko, now you're you seeing my slides? Great. Also has studied hydrology, which is, a way to study the how much water, the water resources that are, are flowing through the earth, as Dr. Carrie mentioned. And your teacher there in Delta Junction has tons of experience working for the Delta Salsha Soil and Water Conservation District. She is at statewide leadership with the FFA, or Future Farmers of America, and also has studied these processes, has helped run what we call a snow tel site or snow telemetry. It's getting all this data. And how lucky to have a teacher like that lead you all through a snow investigation. So I just want to share, those of you who aren't in Delta Junction, this is Miss Tammy Kovalenko. Here is one of her students collecting snow water equivalent, or SWE, using this outer tube of the globe rain gauge. And then you can see collecting depths in millimeters. And wow, look at the snow, this huge snowdrift. You can see that there's some grasses showing on the bottom in the foreground of this photo. But if the snowdrift goes all the way to the windows, it's got to be pretty deep. So enough from me. If you are ready, Miss Tammy and your students, I'd love to hear more about your work at your school.
Okay, we're live. Thank you so much for hosting us. And thank you for Dr. Carrie for giving us that great information. I'm going to introduce one of my students, Fiona Rooney, and she'll be explaining the slides that they have created.
Greetings from Delta Junction. My name is Fiona Rooney, and we will be talking about snowdrifts, melt, and compaction. Let us begin with our ground findings. As you can see in the first image, this is the first site on draft where, after a few weeks of measuring, we had discovered it was completely ice at the bottom. We were no longer able to measure physically along the snowdrift entirely because of the ice. And in the second image, you can also see an ice bubble that we had found on a other drift. When we looked inside it, we could see when we looked inside it, we could see that it was entirely ice from bottom up. Our team was very curious about these occurrences and how it could happen within the span of only a couple of weeks. That's our next slide. Next. Later on in our research, from late January to early February, we had a Chinook appear, which is basically a warm tropical wind for 4 to 5 days. Because of this, we had lost a lot of our snowpack. And when looking around the snowdrift after the Chinook, we found melt clusters. Now, how melt clusters occur: when heat increases around the snow, whether it's due to rain, warm weather front, etc., the snow will melt down, causing melt clusters and further icicle creation, as you can see on the second image. But not only that, we had discovered a full display of ice layers. Next slide. To continue with slide 2, the images at the bottom show before and after results of the Chinook. The one in the middle showing the before, and the two on the side showing the after. The background image giving you an overall outlook on the lack of snow. Now that we have looked at the examples and identified what melt clusters are, let's talk about how this could happen. We can see this diagram that I had created. The green streaks represent the snow, the blue dots represent the snow sand, and the black streaks represent the ice. Now, apologies. Now, when heat increases, as said before, with little to no wind, the layers will go ahead and melt down. Now, meltwater does not spread unless there are boundaries between the snow layers called snow ribs. And which causes percolation. Now, these layers, they can make several ice layers at one time, connected by a percolation column. Now, these layers melt and then further compact when heat decreases and a new layer is added and the ice ribs are further fortified. But how does wind help with this fortification? Now, as you can see, the wind represented by the arrows. Where is it? What's about the arrows? The wind typically blows in a leapfrog manner called saltation. The wind continuously helps with these new layers further helps with these new layers because wind typically helps with temperature control. And the harsher the wind could be, the more potential to create further compaction. And these layers also help with insulation and pressure for the snow to compact. Now, during this observation, we had come to the hypothesis that snow compaction had to do mainly with the help of the wind. And we're still continuing to study it as the weeks go on. Thank you.
Wow, that was so great. I am incredibly impressed. And the fact that you are observing these processes and then being able to describe them is phenomenal. I'm going to go ahead and stop my slides and then ask, first of all, round of applause from everyone in the audience for you. And I see the kids over in Eagle cheering you on as well. That was a phenomenal explanation and presentation. I'm sure you have some questions, and I also think our scientists, Julie and Dr. Carrie, might also have some explanations for what you were saying. So I know that Julia is studying your same exact snowdrift from space. And then also Dr. Carrie might have a lot of ideas about what you just explained. How about we go to Julia first? And then if you have questions for our scientists, feel free, after Julia shares some of her slides here, feel free to just ask at this point. You can say what's happening and we can have a dialogue about it. But I know that Julia has some that could explain what you're saying as well.
Yeah, that was an amazing presentation. Seriously, that was incredible. Great job. Yeah, so I know you talked a little bit about different layers in the snow and kind of having layers of, I think, dirt in the snow, or I think sand is the word you were using for it, which is, yeah, a really great observation. You know, I think a lot of us here know that Delta Junction is notorious for its winds. And I know you talked about a Chinook wind that you had earlier this year. And so when I was out in Delta Junction, well, in the Eastern Alaska Range outside Delta Junction just a couple of weeks ago, taking those globes observations, I was coming out to this glacier And this is the Canwell Glacier, which is kind of right in your neighborhood, which is, you know, such a great area. And you can see in this picture all of these different layers of snow. And all of these different layers formed from different snow events, and maybe some of it, you know, some of them could have been formed from the wind. I know we talked a little bit when we came out about how some of these snowdrifts are formed. Most of them are formed from the wind. There are lots of different types of snowdrifts, but when the wind blows the snow, these snowflakes kind of get beat up and they get a little bit sharp and start to stick together. And then they can form a hard surface on top of the snowdrift. And it looks like you guys had a little bit of a hard surface. I saw a little bit of post holing up a little bit higher, and I'm kind of curious to, you know, talk maybe a little bit about what could have happened there, where I think you guys had talked about in other years you were able to walk all the way up on the snowdrift, whereas this year it looks like maybe that wasn't a possibility, and maybe it had to do with that warmer Chinook wind that you guys had, or the warmer temperatures. But I think the different layers in the snowpack could also have something to do with that. And I think the location of your snowdrift is also interesting because it's on the side of a building. So, you know, maybe there's a snowstorm coming in and the wind is blowing it, and the building kind of slows down the snow and deposits all that snow right on the side of the building. Plus, wind could also, you know, be blowing snow from somewhere else. And another thing we talked about was that, you know, snowdrifts hold a lot of water and tend to have more water than the surrounding snowpack. And I think I saw in some of your pictures that you didn't really have much snow anywhere else except for the snowdrift, which I also think is a really great example of that point. And yeah, I'm curious to hear some of your questions. I know Dr. Vuyovich probably knows way more than me, but yeah, I'm excited to hear what your questions are.
I just want to follow up and say that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing the work. I'm really impressed that just in this, you know, short amount of time, you've collected observations, you've made really good, you know, theories about what's going on. I mean, I think pretty good theories about what's going on, and you have kind of a whole science question laid out. I think it's really exciting, and I'm really happy that I got to see this. I think Julia just talked a lot about the drifting, and you also mentioned the Chinook and everything. I was going to talk about, or just mention the ice formations that you talked about in the beginning. I'm not sure about your drift, but you know what we see a lot is melt kind of starts at the surface because the air temperature gets warm and there's kind of movement in the air, or you have sun kind of beating down on the snowpack. And then the liquid water forms these preferential flow paths through the snowpack. So you get these kind of tubes of water that start to form. And then if it gets cold, they can refreeze. And so I don't know if that's what's going on in your snowpack, but that's something that we see a lot in different areas. And then you can also, if your ground is warm, or if you have water coming in from the surface, but your ground is frozen, you can get these ice layers at the bottom. And yeah, maybe that's something that you're seeing, that the water has nowhere to flow because the ground is frozen at the bottom, or the ground is releasing heat from the ground up and causing a little melt at the bottom, and then it's freezing. And so one thing, I guess maybe this is a question for you all, is every time we do a SnowX campaign, our science question is really what dictates the measurements we take. And it changes, you know, in each of these different campaigns. So one thing you could do is look at, like if you dug a snow pit and you looked at the temperature gradient, you would see, does it get warmer from the top to the, you know, bottom, or does it get colder as you go down in the snowpack? Then you can also look at layers and see, are there these sand layers? So did you have wind events throughout the season and then new snow on top of that? You know, maybe you could see how many of these events you had. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are on like how you might answer some of these questions.
So I know we only have a couple minutes left, or 5 minutes for the Delta Junction students before your bell rings for your passing period to go to another class. But yeah, I hear Dr. Carrie asking you what you think is happening at your site. Like, what do you think is happening that is explaining that big tube of frozen ice? And also, do you think that it's freezing from the top down or the bottom up?
To answer the second question, I believe that it is freezing from the bottom up. And for the first question, we have not fully figured out what could be the cause of that ice bubble. We are currently looking into it. What is the snow pit?
Oh, we are also here in the next couple of weeks going to be digging a snow pit alongside the backside of it on the north side of the bubble, so we can stay in the shade and then still continue to observe it for the continuing weeks, because currently we have melting water coming off our roof, and predicted temperatures are supposed to be in the high 20s and 30s. So we're expected to be on a warming trend. So I'm hoping that we can keep that ice pit open for a couple weeks, at least till spring break. So then we can see exactly if it's melting down, or is it actually freezing up through the layers? So is it meltwater coming down through the tube and then freezing, or are we just getting that compaction and layering up? But we're curious to connect with you and see what your thoughts are as we send photographs.
Yeah, send photographs. And also, if you're digging a pit, what Dr. Carrie suggested of digging that pit and then getting out really quickly and taking those temperatures along your snow pit and see where it's warmer. I heard Fiona, you said that it's the hypothesis is that it's freezing from the bottom up, which meant that I'm thinking that you're saying that it's colder on the bottom and warmer on the surface. Okay, so then you can take those temperatures, and when you make your globe report and poster, you would write on that poster hypothesis, and then you can write in what your hypothesis is, and then you put in the data for the temperature across that whole snow pit, and then explain your your results, and then whether your hypothesis was validated or not. And you know what? It's great in science to prove yourself wrong sometimes. It's great to actually have it be opposite what you expected, or it might confirm what you expected. So I'm really excited for what you are going to be doing next week. Sounds like you guys need some shovels, because that snow, that drift is still pretty big.
Yes, we have some very long handled shovels that we'll be using.
I know you have a few more minutes before the bell rings. Do you have any other questions for our scientists, Julia and Dr. Carrie? Or also, I'll give you that chance here. And then also we have the students from Eagle who also might have some questions.
My favorite quotes is, I think it's the what.
Ask what the comments say.
What did one of the comments say? I saw it pop up, but I did not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's really hard. You got your big screen. The comment is from Patty Brown, a science educator. Thanks, Patty, for joining this. One of her favorite quotes is, "If your hypothesis is correct, you made a measurement. If it's incorrect, you made a discovery."
Nice.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No further questions.
We have no further questions
Okay.
here. Does anybody want to say hello to our Ukrainian folks? Veronica, do you want to give a greeting from Alaska Ukrainians? We have some Ukrainian students here, so But anyways, we want to thank everyone for this opportunity in meeting everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will be signing off to get through our rest of the classes, and thank you again for hosting.
Well, thank you. Got another round of applause to the Delta Junction students. I know that you all have to go, but people can stay on our call right now because we do have some time to continue the conversation with our students in Eagle, and also everybody who has joined might want to talk to our scientists, Dr. Carrie and Julia. But once again, excellent work, Delta Junction. We're so proud of you all, and keep getting out in the snow, and let's hope for some snow.
Okay, thank you so much, and greetings to everyone.
All right, so we have a hand up. Bree, go ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Carrie, I was really interested in what you were saying about how snow can melt from the, I guess, light and heat from the sun from the top down. And I was specifically interested in what you were saying about like the ice tubes that could form. And I was wondering like how someone might go about finding an ice tube without breaking it and kind of understand its orientation inside the snowdrift.
That's a great question. And it's not easy. There have been a lot of people that have tried to understand, how water flows through the snow, because because it forms these preferential paths, you get faster movement than if it were just to melt down like all homogeneous all the way to the bottom. And so people have been trying to figure out like, how do these form? How can we predict where they form? What is the flow rate through them? I would say like in all of my field campaigns, all of the work I've done in the snow, it's been by chance, by luck, that I've dug a pit and found these really cool flow fingers going through it. So it's not easy to just spot a place and find it. But if you know something's happened, like, you have a pretty, good solid snowpack, but then there was a real warming event or there was rain on snow, then you could go specifically out to places maybe where you see some, these, there's a name for it that I'm not remembering, but these kind of pockets, like these little bubbles on top of the snowpack, and then you could dig there, and I bet you'd find something. So the way people study it, what some people have done is use dye, like actually simulate a wetting event where they pour dyed water on top, and then they dig a pit, and you can kind of see where the red or blue, whatever color you use, flow paths are. What we've done in SnowX, because we're really interested in how much water is in the snow, because it affects our different remote sensing techniques. We use a sensor to measure the permittivity, and so that tells us something about how much liquid water is in there. And then, in terms of like water that's like flowed down and then refrozen, that I've only seen a couple times in my life. And one of them was in Alaska in 2023. We actually saw, because that has to happen pretty quick to have a liquid water flowing through the snow, but then it gets cold enough that it refreezes before it actually makes it to the ground. So we did find one site that had some really awesome little ice tubes down there. So I think I'm very curious about what you have in your snowdrift, and I'd love to see the pictures when you dig your snow pit.
Thanks, Dr. Carrie. I did see the students in Eagle. There was somebody maybe with a green shirt on who had his hand up a little while ago, but you're all kind of little dots on my screen. Did anyone, any of the students from Eagle have a question or an observation about snow that you have seen or would like to share or would like to ask? I can't hear you. Try again. Ms. Christie, let's try your microphone settings. While you're looking for that, I'm putting in the chat some lesson plans from our Winter World, which were made here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks with the Geophysical Institute and here at people who worked at Geographic Information Network of Alaska and the Snow, Ice, and Permafrost group. One of those is adding colored water to the snow, digging it down and seeing those preferential flow paths. Okay, let's try again, Delta. Let's see, maybe we can hear your question, or excuse me, Eagle.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Does like the weather and stuff like have anything to do with like the snow? Because it's fresh ice on ice. So
Oh.
what does the snow have anything to do with the ice and stuff?
I'll give that question to Dr. Carrie, who did study ice, river ice in Alaska as well.
Well, they're just different forms of water. And are you referring to river ice specifically, or the ice tubes that they're seeing in their snowdrift?
I think they're referring to river ice.
Oh, river ice.
Yeah, it's river ice.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I used to do a lot more work studying river ice, and river ice will form, from the water up, like it's the surface of your river that's actually forming an ice, and it's solid, right? It's not precipitation that's falling out of the sky. So you get this growth of ice on top of the river, but then you also, once that forms, you also have precipitation from the sky that comes and just falls on top of it. So now you have water in the form of snow, these little crystals sitting on top of a solid block of ice water, sitting on top of your liquid water beneath that. It's really cool that it's all together. And sometimes what can happen is if it rains on top of the snow or melts a little bit and then refreezes at the bottom, some of your snowpack can actually turn into ice and makes your ice cover even thicker. So it's a whole dynamic interaction between all these different forms of water.
Thank you. That was a great question and answer. I think we have time for maybe one more question from the students, and then we can also open it up to everyone as well. Is there any more from the students in Eagle about snow or ice or anything cold?
Well, yeah, I can say just we have tons of snow in New England, and we feel for you in Alaska. We actually love our weather here. Some people may be struggling from cold, but we love it here. So we skiing. We really love all the winter activities. So and this type of programs is an amazing opportunity to collaborate. So all our students here in Boston and Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, we all really sending our greetings to all of you, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. You all are amazing, amazing students and amazing teachers and amazing scientists. And we would love to really follow your footsteps and maybe collaborate sometimes in the future. So kudos to all of you. Keep up the great work. Amazing presentation today and really fantastic job that you've done. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Larissa. Appreciate that. Julia, as the students were talking, and you spent a lot of time getting outside, on anything that comes to mind that you're wondering about or would you like to share?
Yeah, I think something that just came to mind, Larissa, from what you were saying is you were talking about, your snow activities in the Northeast, and I think you mentioned skiing, and I can't tell you how many people up in Alaska I've talked to who have talked about skiing in the Northeast, and they talk about basically learning how to ski on ice, because your snow is so different there than it is here. And SnowX was this huge campaign, and they had this, huge question and, area of research to tackle because snow is so, it has such a huge variability, whereas, snow in the Northeast kind of is really icy, whereas maybe you come to Alaska and you're snow skiing in the Alaska range, and it's just, the most prime powder in the entire world. And so I think it's really cool to get to collaborate with people all over the world who, we can all be studying the same thing, but there's just so much variability across all of it.
Yeah, and I personally grew up in the area I don't want to take your time, but just want to say -46 to -49 was really something that I experienced in my life. So it's really, really something to experience. But thank you for the really great job and fantastic presentation. And it looks like students having hands up. Sorry, go ahead, Christy, back to you.
And back to the students, Ms. Christie and Eagle students.
Hi, Christy. We were talking about how maybe those snow tubes, how do they affect the subnivean habitat of our little creatures that live under the snow? Sorry, I think it's ice tubes. Ice tubes. I said the wrong thing.
Oh, the ice that's actually going down there. That's a good question. We had one of our snow pits in Bonanza Creek. We dug the wall and there was like a perfect little hole where you could just see that where the mouse came out, and now he would just be out in open air instead of in the safety of the snowpack that they're used to. So we felt a little bit bad about that. I think what my guess is they have all these little paths that go through the snowpack, and once it gets flooded, they just maybe know to go up above that. The ice layers actually may provide a really nice kind of bottom platform for them to run across and create some of their tubes, but definitely not my area of research. But it's really fun to see those little the paths where they go on, and to see them out in the wild.
Yeah, keep observing those kind of things. That could lead to itself to another globe investigation as well. I was just hunting around for some lesson plans made here, and it's in Inupiaq languages as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat here and look for it. And while I'm doing that, if I could turn it back to Allison for some closing comments.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. And thank you to our presenters, Dr. Carrie Vuyovich and Julia, and our students in Eagle. Great questions. I can't wait to see the research projects that you all produce. And oh my gosh, Delta Junction, this has really been a highlight of the month. It's a great way to end the month. It's a great way to end the week. I'm inspired and I learned. I live in a place that does not have snow, and I learned so much today. So thank you all. It's just really inspiring to hear the work that our student scientists are doing. And I will leave you with, I put a link in the chat for the Snow View Intensive Observation period webpage. A recording of this meeting will be posted on the Snow View IOP page, probably early next week on Monday. And so I encourage you to share it with your networks so that others can see the amazing work that our student scientists are doing. So thank you all for being here and joining us on this Friday. It's been very inspiring. And thank you, Christy, for organizing it all. What a great event.
Thank you. We're headed out to go skiing. This PE starts now. So we're
All
going to go
right. Have a great time.
Have a
Enjoy it. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. What a fun time to spend Friday afternoon, evening on the East Coast together. And the folks in Guatemala, I don't know what time it is there, but across the world, to everyone who's joined, we really appreciate you. Let's keep collaborating.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.